She was asking me to say that he was abusing me. And I actually had the thought by the time I was 12 years old that this woman could probably kill me and she could get away with it. She was speaking in court. And that telegraphed a message to me, a very strong message to me, that no one can help you. No one is listening, and no one wants to help you. It overcame every safeguard that was supposed to be there for me. My name is Candis. I was in Ginger's documentary Erasing Families a couple of years ago. Actually, when I filmed that, I was in law school. I was in the middle of law school, where I started attending simply because I was an alienated kid and I was angry enough to go to law school for 3 years. So I've been thinking a lot about that experience in the last couple of days when Ginger asked me to be on this phone call today and just share a little bit of my story. So if anybody has any questions, just go ahead and feel free to type any questions in the chat, and she'll get to those. First thing is first. I'm 39 years old, so I was going through this stuff in the mid-90s. And I'd like to say that a lot of things have changed, but sadly they haven't. And I know this because I work in the court system now. Now I'm a licensed attorney in the state of California. So I was born and raised in California, the product of a mixed marriage. My dad's Middle Eastern and my mother was white American. And there was this growing sense closer to, I guess it started a couple of years before the divorce started, that my dad was just simply lesser than. He wasn't smart. He wasn't around. He wasn't a good father. His family wasn't any good. And it was really kind of weird because we were really close with my dad's side of the family and we were comfortable in my dad's culture up until that point. But once the divorce started, the campaign of denigration became really robust, I would say. And I think that's where parental alienation can become its most dangerous, is when it's incremental. When you have a previously healthy bond existing between the child and both parents, and then suddenly some event happens, like a separation, and now there's an opening for one parent to go and start denigrating the other. And that's what happened to me. And it was dangerous. And it was dangerous mainly because it was so successful. So beginning around age 8 or 9, my mom started making comments about my dad's culture. And she started bringing more religion into the house. And that ended up becoming the foundation for her campaign of denigration against my dad, which eventually led to alienation. And spirituality and religion is so powerful, specifically to children. And my siblings and I were no exception. My mom had always been a big promoter of corporal punishment. And soon the religious dogma started coupling with corporal punishment, and the corporal punishment became more extreme. And there was always this carrot and stick situation. Anytime you would go for the carrot, you would get the stick, essentially. And that carrot was being nice to my dad. First, it was taking my dad's side. There was this interpretation that anytime I asked for my dad, or I had fun with my dad, or I was not criticizing my dad, I was essentially taking his side. That's how it started. It started with this concept of loyalty. Are you loyal to your mother or are you not? And eventually that loyalty became bigger. The sense of loyalty was not simply inculcated with my mom by way of taking her side and saying, I take your side. Yeah, dad's awful. I'm really sorry that you're going through this. If you can imagine a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old having to say things like that to their parent. But there I was, basically having to be my mom's support. And that stated support, that verbal support, very quickly was not enough. That support needed to look like agreement with everything my mom was saying about my dad. It started to look like rejection of my dad in front of her. I couldn't just say, yeah, at this visit, I wouldn't let him hug me. It was, she needed to see me express this this rejection of him. And then the rejection needed to be more and more extreme. I needed to use stronger language. And before I knew it, she was asking me to say that he was abusing me in a sexual way. She was asking me, and she didn't say it was a question. She didn't pose it as a question. It was, hey, you should tell somebody about your dad molesting you. I'm sitting there thinking, my dad doesn't do that. And that's when I started thinking, okay, it's not just bending the truth now. It's not just, oh, this is how she feels from her perspective. This is, oh, she's making up a story. And my dad had said that to me before, that my mom just keeps making up stories. And I used to be very rejecting of that whole concept. She's not making up stories. She's my mom. She doesn't lie. She absolutely was making up stories. The problem was, this is by now I'm like around 10, 11 years old. The problem with that, and when I realized, ooh, she is making up stories, the court had already, and without any input from me, started going along with her narrative that she was speaking in court, saying that my dad is this Middle Eastern abusive man, and using a lot of harmful stereotypes and really leveraging this Western hegemony towards someone who is just dark-skinned and came from a country that's a little unpopular here in the West. And that telegraphed a message to me, a very strong message to me, that no one can help you. No one is listening, and no one wants to help you. Even if they know what's going on, they don't want to help you. Nobody even listens to your father, and he's an adult with an attorney that he pays a lot of money to, but he's listening to them. So why would anybody listen to you, little 10-year-old, 11-year-old Candis? And at that point, it became apparent to me that going along with what my mom was saying was how I would survive living with her. And I can't really explain how an 11-year-old or 10-year-old kid understands that. But I did at that age. And it didn't matter what she did to me. I needed to survive. I actually had the thought by the time I was 12 years old that this woman could probably kill me and she could get away with it, because she was always so smooth, so smooth. She could, the level of con artistry that she possessed was, it overcame every safeguard that was supposed to be there for me, to protect me. And like I said, it didn't matter what she did to me. My first job was 11 years old, panhandling. She would pick me up from school, drop me off in front of a grocery store with a bucket, saying I was collecting money for some kind of religious mission. It wasn't. It was for her to gallivant around with the men she used to run around with and sustain her lifestyle, because she didn't want to work. It didn't matter that she would, at 12 years old, leave me for days on end in charge of my two younger siblings, in charge of feeding them, in charge of making sure that the homework was done, and in charge of making sure that none of the neighbors or the manager of the apartment complex knew that we were home alone for several days on end. I don't know, she never told me specifically, but it became clear that part of my job was to make sure that we could maintain this kind of life and dynamic, and that no one ever knew what was really going on in my home. And that's how things snowballed. That's how the rejection of my dad continued. That is how I kept making sense of it, how I justified it. And the thing about alienators, especially if they're a smooth alienator like my mom was, they will bury one little kernel of truth in everything that they will say. And they will focus so hard on that little kernel of truth, and every once in a while reach out for a new detail until the kernel has snowballed into this huge orb that is just constantly on your back, and the weight of it is on your back. And the most amazing thing is that it only takes a small release of just a couple of those lies, a couple of the foundational lies, for everything to come crashing down. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a second. But anyway, I went through my teenage years just rejecting my dad all the time. And when he wasn't around, talking negatively about him. I remember there was one time where I wished some kind of harm on my dad in front of a friend whose dad was dealing with some health issues. And this boy turned around and said, I would be devastated if I ever felt the way you do about your dad. If I ever felt the way about my dad that you feel about your dad. I can't imagine my dad ever being hurt and being okay with it. And I was kind of initially a little annoyed by his comment because I'm like, he doesn't know. But actually, he did know. He knew more about my situation than I did with that one comment. And eventually, I turned 19 years old, despite everything my mom had told me growing up that she would allow me to continue living with her through college because she wanted me to get through college. She changed her mind and she started asking for more money than I could make and go to school at the same time. And that's when the physical abuse got worse. It was pretty bad by then. There were times that I would make a face like my dad, or I would say something about my dad, and she would just beat the hell out of me. But once I became an adult, it got worse. It got a lot worse. And by then she was remarried and he was allowed to put his hands on me too. It was him trying to choke me one night that I left the house and I started living in my car. And I think I was doing my homework by the light of my dome light one night in my SUV where I was living. And I thought, you know, my dad never hit me, ever. Not once. My dad was one of those dads that liked to lecture you until you'd rather just be hit so it would be over with. And then he would say, okay, now you've suffered enough. So it was like that. And I was thinking, who would do this to their child and allow someone else to put their hands on them while they're trying to go to college and better themselves? I was a good kid. I never, ever, ever did anything wrong. I never got in trouble. I always kept to myself and I wasn't allowed to leave our house. The isolation was how she kept the control. Because if I wasn't socializing, then people weren't finding out what was going on and telling me how abnormal it was. So there I am, 19 years old, working 3 different jobs, registered in 18 units of college courses at the community college, and thinking to myself, what more could she want from me? She's getting money and rent from me. I'm scared to death of her. I don't get in any trouble and I have my head down and I'm going to school. And so when I went to school the next day, I kind of started looking for my dad. I got online. I found a bunch of my extended relatives. I took down one of their numbers and I held on to it for a while. When I finally made the call to one of my uncles just to reach out, I wasn't sure what I was reaching out for. I wasn't sure what I would even ask when they picked up the phone. I wasn't sure what I would say. I wasn't even sure that they would remember me if I said, hey, it's Candis. But when I finally did make the call, I was suffering a physical reaction to what was happening. And after I got off the phone with my uncle, I couldn't figure out why I was having this physical manifestation of anxiety. And then I realized, I honestly thought at 19 years old, smart, reasonable individual, I really thought there would be like a SWAT team coming down from the rafters, that there would be some huge event that everyone would know about it, that I would be in trouble. And when I got off the phone, I actually waited for someone to come and apprehend me, I guess. That was the level of fear that a 19-year-old with all of her faculties had. And it wasn't like I was some afraid kid. I was the most assertive, confrontational, self-defending kid at my school. The only trouble I ever got in was defending myself physically. And there I was, expecting the police to come and cite me or arrest me because I called my dad. And that uncle put me in touch with my dad later. And it was kind of a bumpy start. I ghosted him for a little while after talking to him. And then it was a matter of weeks. And then at 19 years old, I was almost 20. I remember it was just before my 20th birthday. That's when I made that phone call. And since then, it's been a road that's taken a lot of twists and turns. But now I'm 39 and I'm a lawyer. And my dad is in my life. My dad actually lives with me. It's not so unusual in our culture. I don't live with him. He lives with me. And it's not always great, primarily primarily because there's just still a lot of emotional damage that was done. But the best part about it is that I practice law in the same county that did this to me, and every once in a while I run into a lawyer that was involved in my parents' case, and I can't lie, it feels really good to let them know that they tried to throw me into a statistical gutter, I always say, and it didn't work. It didn't work. Particularly, I enjoyed decimating the guardian ad litem that never even met with me at 14 years old. Never even met with me. He happened to be in my courtroom, and I humiliated him to the degree that he now no longer appears in any courtroom that I'm in. He appears virtually because he is afraid of me, and he should be. He should be. Something I actually tell a lot of my clients. I work in juvenile dependency. That's where parents find themselves when child welfare services removes their children. Some parents don't get their kids back and their parental rights are terminated. And if you can imagine what it's like for someone like me to console someone who maybe they couldn't get sober in time, or for some reason or another, they failed to reunite. The thing I tell them is this: you're not suddenly not a parent simply because your child is not with you, okay? And I know that sounds kind of weird. You're probably thinking, like, what the hell is she talking about? This is what I'm talking about. At some point, there will be an opportunity for your child to come back to you. Might be when they're an adult, might be sooner. I hope it's sooner for every single person. But while your child isn't with you, it's your responsibility to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Now, for some of these clients, it's please stay sober, even though your parental rights have been terminated. For other clients, it's please continue in your therapy. I don't know what it is that any of you are doing in terms of self-care, but make sure that you do it. Because when your kids eventually have that opportunity, what you really need to make sure that you have is the strength to be a part of their lives. You need to be healthy, okay? And every day that you choose to be healthy, every day that you choose not to let this experience change who you are, you're still parenting, because you're making sure to sustain and protect and continue to build that individual who is still their parent. That's you. You're still parenting every single day that you're okay. Hang on to that part, because if that opportunity arises for you to be in their life, you need to make sure you're okay. You need to make sure you're 100%, because once they come back, they need you. They not only need 100% of you, they need like 1,000% of you. So you really need to make sure that you are that person for them that can help them clean up this emotional mess and work with them through that. You need to make sure that you're strong and that you're reliable when that time comes. Okay? You're parenting. Every single day you're a strong person, and that you're a whole person as much as you can be. You're parenting. And now that I work in dependency, and sometimes I share this story, and my colleagues think, how come you're not one of the kids' attorneys? I'm thinking, because there are parents out there that when a child is removed from the custodial parent, they need to have custody of that child. The law says if they are safe in the custody and care of their non-custodial parent, they need to go to that parent. And I want to make sure that that happens. I would never have wanted to put myself in the statistical fray of the foster care system, especially since I know what happens in some foster homes. I have zero relationship with my mother. The response that she had when I reunited with my dad, she actually ended up alienating me from my siblings, who did not ever reunite with my dad. So I have zero relationship with her. I have not spoken to her in over 10 years. I think it's closer to 15. And it was the single best decision that I ever made. She made it easy, though, and I won't try to cover up the fact that there's a certain degree of privilege in that. There's a huge degree of privilege in the fact that my alienator was so physically abusive and so terrorizing emotionally. She made my decision easy. I don't have to balance two parents that don't get along because the one that did the alienating is truly a monster. And she has some serious psychological problems. She's not safe to be around. And I think that also answers an earlier question that someone had, whether my siblings reunited. I was 10 when my parents divorced. My sister was 6 and my brother was 4. And she lopped off the relationship with them. I talk to my siblings every once in a while, but they just can't. My relationship with my dad is pretty good.